So as you've probably seen from the thumbnail of this video, I got a new camera. It's an interesting one. It's definitely a retro style, retro legacy design that's been inspired by an old camera that I have. And that camera is my old FE2. To be quite honest, I didn't expect that I would get this camera. The Nikon Z F, not the ZFC, but the full frame version of this camera. Don't let the stylish camera body and design fool you. This is definitely a modern interior with lots of beefed up specs. See this camera, I definitely remind myself of this classic style vintage camera, you know, from the SLR days. And I believe this particular model was actually from the 70s. And I actually used to shoot film in middle school and in high school in black and white in this camera itself. Not only has a black and white mode, it actually has a very focused version of all the dials of SLR cameras. I didn't expect this camera to be sold out everywhere, and it took me a while to actually figure out where I could actually buy this camera. But I managed to track down the location here in Las Vegas from B&C Cameras. So thankfully, I'm really grateful for those guys. They were the ones that were able to get me the Z9 when it came out in little to no wait time, and I was able to get this guy almost on release day. So thank you. All right, so this is kind of my initial thoughts and review of the Nikon Z F. And to be quite honest, this is the style of camera that I've waited from Nikon for a very long time. You know, it's got that autofocusing, it's got the flip out screen, it's got a very nice design and build that doesn't feel cheap, and it's got the autofocusing capabilities of the Z9, and it's got almost the same picture specs of the Z6 series. But what I really like about this camera is that it was very unexpected. To be quite fair, after the Z8, I didn't know what to expect from Nikon. They really blew it out of the water with the Z9. The Z8 was basically the same camera, but in a smaller body. And when they released this camera, again, I didn't expect to want to get it. But after kind of testing it out and having a good feel for it, I couldn't say no. There's a lot to love about this camera and almost barely anything to dislike. So let's actually kind of go over the pros and cons of this camera. One of the things I really like about the ZFC is that it has the Z9 processor, the XP7, and it has that amazing autofocus capability thanks to this special processor that it has built in. The other thing I really like about this camera is that it has that flip out screen. And I know to a lot of people that's not a big deal, especially if you're coming from the Canon or Sony base, but to be quite honest, this is something that Nikon has only produced in a couple of bodies. And one of the first camera bodies I got specifically for this flip screen was actually the DSLR APS-C camera. I think it's called the Nikon D5600. And it was actually my first camera that I got because of its flip screen. It was one of the very reasons I got that camera. The other thing that I really like about this camera is that it has a lot of the modern video specs that we are kind of starting to expect out of Nikon. And if you would have jumped back to Nikon, let's say even 3 years ago with the Z6, Z7, Mark 1 and 2, they were not even in the video game, to be quite fair. When I started out with the Z6 Mark 1, I got the upgraded, like built-in B-RAW that they included with Blackmagic that you had to pay and ship to Nikon to actually activate it. I'm really happy that they did include all these capabilities in this camera because it makes it so much easier to shoot on video, where Nikon wasn't taken seriously at all before the Z9 and Z8 in the video space whatsoever. Their autofocus has really been improving. They've added, N-Log, which is another big bonus to this camera that can be recorded internally. You don't have to record to an external monitor anymore. Which kind of brings me to my next point as to what I love about this camera is that it has such a nice design, especially when you pair it with the smaller portable Z lenses. Like I've been pairing a lot with the 24 to 120 f4 lens, which is a very travel friendly camera, which I think this is kind of the audience, I would say, that this camera is really shooting towards. It's the people who want to be shooting photos and video without drawing too much attention. And quite frankly, this camera, I've taken it almost everywhere with me for the past week, and besides people saying that it's a nice camera, it really doesn't draw attention, which I really like. The other thing I really like about this camera, it's very different than the Nikon Z 6 and 7 series or Z8 really camera bodies itself. What I like about it most, and I know this sounds, I'm sounding like a broken record here, but this camera actually has a specific dedicated black and white feature that you could actually start shooting photos with. And I didn't think that would be that fun, or I would actually use that feature so often, but because it's there at a flip of a switch, I've actually been shooting most of my work in the past week or so just with black and white. Even though the images in the JPEGs come out in black and white, I could still color correct them in color if I want to, but having that lens where you could focus in on just that color of preset of black and white makes it so much funner to shoot in black and white. I think what I'm eventually going to be doing with this camera is actually pairing it with a lot of my older vintage Nikon AI glass that I have. So this lens right here is actually the 2.88 lens. I've actually been pairing it quite a bit as well with this setup. So I do have to use my adapter. As you can see, even paired with the adapter, the lens is not very big. This package, very easy to walk around with, not too heavy as compared to other ones, and it allows me to essentially add in quite a bit of my older Nikon glass without having, it feeling too odd on it. And this retro body, kind of goes to where Nikon is aiming towards. It's a lot of the retrofitters who have a lot of older glass who want to make the jump to the mirrorless world. And I think this is where it's a good camera. It kind of goes to the next point where priced at a very good value. It's $2,000 roughly in the US with, before tax, with nothing added on. And if anyone already has a lot of F glass or FA glass from their DSLR days or SLR days, you could essentially pair it with this camera and do really well. It kind of brings in home one of the things I think Nikon is really striving for with their cameras and their ecosystem right now, is that they're trying to bridge a lot of their old technology and their new technology into one cohesive ecosystem. What Nikon is doing right now is that they're hitting a lot of the video folks now. They're hitting a lot of the older generation of Nikon photographers, as well as giving new technology a new life, where you could blend technology such as older Nikon glass with new technology. And I think that's really cool because retrofitted. And this is kind of where I really like to, I know I shouldn't compare it, but this is where I really like to think of this modern redesigned sports car. So I probably would compare it to a classic Mustang from the 60s or 70s with a new internal engine and modified interior. On the outside, it looks like an older car, but on the inside, everything is very updated. So it gives that classic modern feel to it, which I think has more lasting value in my opinion than a lot of... Let's kind of go over the things that I don't like about this camera, which, to be quite fair, isn't a lot. My in-depth review will probably come in a few months later. But right now, here are kind of my thoughts about what I don't like about this camera. So if anyone's been familiar with the modern Nikon cameras, they know that it comes with a little joystick in the back. And I know this is a little nitpicky, but when you're doing your autofocusing on this guy, you actually have to use this little pad here, which is not the best really. Touchscreen as well, the focus, but I'm not a huge fan of that. I'm so used to the little joystick here that it would have been nice to have that as well. Another thing I don't really necessarily, it would have been a nice to have, if you will. I wish they would have included NRAW in this. So for those who don't, shoot in the Nikon ecosystem, NRAW is essentially the equivalent of RAW capabilities in video, similar to cameras such as RED cameras like the RED Komodo. But the issue with that is that all the companies are afraid to include RAW capabilities in their cameras because RED cameras has essentially stunted the whole camera market for video specs without giving that capability. And they're afraid because they infringe on the patent that RED has with RAW shooting. So it would have been kind of nice to actually have that capability here, but I do understand the video specs and limitations of this camera. And long on its own is great. It has a lot of dynamic range already, but NRAW would have been nice. I kind of expect them to include that with their Z6 Mark III. Another thing I don't necessarily like too much, and this is nitpicky again, is that the memory cards. So with a lot of their Z line cameras that are full frame, cameras go with the CFast Express cards, but sadly with this one, you have to use SSD and micro SD. And also, it's in an odd place. It's underneath the camera. I'm not a huge fan of that, but again, just little things that I'm nitpicking. Another little gripe, I guess you would say, because they don't have the dual capabilities, even though the Z6 only has one card slot, it would have been nice to have, if they were going to put SD cards in there, at least make it 2 instead of, again, micro. So I don't have too many micro SD cards, but again, just having a little bit of redundancy is nice. I understand why Nikon didn't put 2 in there. They were trying to keep this camera very slim and low profile. Again, there's not much about this camera that I don't like. If you're looking for my in-depth review for this camera, that'll come in months later. Overall, I've really enjoyed using this camera. It's honestly become my everyday shooter at this point for just still lifes, everyday photos, as well as just great video capabilities for recording. I normally shoot on my Z9 for video. I think this is going to become my everyday, more of a vlog setup, if you will, instead of carrying around my beefy Z9 all the time. And it just makes photography and video so much more fun to shoot with. Again, I really enjoy doing sports and action with my Z9, but for everyday life, this camera just speaks to me. It draws me in more than carrying a beefier camera, so I'm really happy about that overall. The other thing I'm just really excited about is that it's just a good time to be a Nikon shooter. Overall, the Nikon Z lens series has, very, very much matured. It have the super telephoto lenses for sports, wildlife, and bird photography. We have those super sharp primes now that, aren't just the f1.8s that we initially got. We have the Plena that just came out, which is the Nikon 35mm f2.8. We have the Nikon 85, which was released this year. We have the 52.8 or 2.1 as well. The only thing that I can imagine Nikon could release in the next few months is that a weighted 35mm f2.1. And honestly, it's just exciting to be a Nikon shooter. I know seamlessly transition with f-class here and on my modern camera, which I think is amazing. I don't know too many companies that are doing it besides Canon. I'm excited, honestly. It's nice to be able to do this. I look forward to what Nikon's doing in the next few months, but overall, I'm really excited about this camera. Using it, getting to know it a little better, reviewing the heck out of it in my final review in the next few months. Let me know what your thoughts are. Let me know anything you'd like me to review extensively about this camera, but overall, solid camera, as well as probably one of the most stylish cameras that I've seen out there. I know Fuji's been doing this for years, but I gotta applaud Nikon's styling on this. Love to know what your thoughts are. Let me know if you guys are excited to use this camera. And until then, like and subscribe, and we'll talk later.